The studio lights burned hot, casting a golden glow over the set of The Tonight Show. Jimmy Fallon leaned back in his chair, his signature grin plastered across his face, as the audience buzzed with anticipation. Blake Shelton sat across from him, his cowboy hat tilted just so, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, like he was sizing up a room full of strangers. The crowd had been eating up their banter, a mix of playful jabs and music talk. But there was an edge to Blake tonight, something Jimmy hadn't quite clocked yet. Jimmy, ever the showman, launched into his next bit, a game called Truth or Dare, Tonight Show style. The rules were simple: answer a tough question or take on a ridiculous challenge. Blake, known for his quick wit and charm, seemed like the perfect guest for it. The audience roared as Jimmy pulled out a card, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "All right, Blake, here's your first one. Truth or dare?" he asked, leaning forward, the crowd hanging on every word. Blake crossed his arms, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Truth," he said, his drawl thick, confident. Jimmy's grin widened as he read the card aloud. "What's the one thing you've never told anyone in the music industry, something that could shake things up?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the studio. The audience leaned in, sensing the weight of it. Blake's smile faltered, just for a second, but he recovered fast. "You're digging deep tonight, Jimmy," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. He shifted in his seat, his boots scuffing the polished floor. "All right, I'll give you something. Back when I was starting out, I got offered a deal, a big one, but it came with a catch. They wanted me to ditch the country sound, go full pop, said it'd make me a superstar overnight." The crowd gasped, a murmur running through them. Jimmy's eyebrows shot up, his grin turning to genuine surprise. "You turned it down?" Jimmy pressed, sensing a story. Blake nodded, his jaw tight. "Damn right I did. Told him I'd rather sing in dive bars for the rest of my life than sell out who I am." The audience erupted in cheers, but there was a hardness in Blake's eyes, like he was reliving the moment. Jimmy, ever the host, pushed further. "Oot, was it? Come on, Blake, give us a name." The crowd laughed, egging him on, but Blake's expression darkened. "That's where I draw the line, man," Blake said, his voice steady but clipped. "Some things don't need to be aired out on national TV." The audience quieted, sensing the shift. Jimmy, caught off guard, tried to keep the mood light. "Oh, come on, Blake, don't hold out on us," he teased, but his laugh sounded forced. Blake didn't budge. His stare locked on Jimmy, unblinking. The tension hung there, thick and heavy. As the cameras rolled, Jimmy shuffled his cards, trying to pivot. All right, let's move on. Dare then." Blake leaned back, his arms still crossed, and shook his head. "I'm not playing this game if it's gonna be like that," he said, his tone flat. The audience murmured, unsure if this was part of the bit. Jimmy's smile flickered, but he pressed on, tossing out another question. This one about Blake's personal life, something about his relationship with Gwen Stefani. Blake's hand shot up, cutting Jimmy off mid-sentence. "Hold up," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "You want to talk music? Fine. You want to talk my life? That's off limits." The audience was dead quiet now, the air electric. Jimmy, for the first time that night, looked rattled, his usual charm faltering. He opened his mouth to respond, but Blake was already standing, his chair scraping against the floor. "I didn't sign up for this," Blake said, his voice low but firm, as he tipped his hat to the audience. The crowd gasped as he turned, his boots echoing as he walked off the set, leaving Jimmy frozen at his desk, the cameras still rolling, the audience stunned into silence. The studio door slammed shut behind Blake, the sound reverberating through the stunned silence of the Tonight Show set. Jimmy Fallon sat frozen for a split second, his eyes darting to the side, where his producers were already scrambling, headsets buzzing with urgent whispers. The audience, still processing Blake's exit, began to murmur, their voices a low hum of confusion and excitement. Jimmy forced a laugh, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. "Well folks, that's Blake Shelton, keeping it real," he said, his voice a touch too high, his grin strained. The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure whether this was part of the show or a genuine meltdown. Backstage, Blake stormed through the narrow hallway, his boots pounding the linoleum. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face. A young production assistant, barely out of college, hesitated before approaching him, clutching a clipboard like a shield. "Mr. Shelton, sir, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Blake stopped, his broad shoulders tense, and turned to her. His eyes softened for a moment, but his jaw was still set. "I'm fine, darlin', but I ain't going back out there," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. He kept moving, brushing past a rack of costumes and a cluster of stunned crew members in the green room. Blake sank onto a leather couch, tossing his hat onto the coffee table. The room was quiet, save for the muffled sound of Jimmy's voice filtering through the walls. trying to pivot the show back to its usual rhythm. Blake ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He hadn't planned to walk off, hadn't even thought about it until Jimmy's questions started digging too deep. It wasn't just the game, it was the way it felt like a setup. Like Jimmy was fishing for something to turn into a headline. Blake had been in the game long enough to know how these moments got spun, how a single soundbite could become a week-long news cycle. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he pulled it out to see. A text from Gwen Stefani. "You good? Just saw the clip online." Blake's lips twitched into a faint smile. Word traveled fast in the digital age. He typed back a quick, "I'm good, just need it out," before setting the phone face down. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in his head. He didn't regret standing his ground, but he knew this wasn't over. The tabloids, the blogs, the X-posts, they'd all have a field day by morning. Meanwhile, on the set, Jimmy was powering through the next segment, a comedic bit with a guest comedian who'd been rushed out to fill the gap. The audience laughed on cue, but the energy was off, the earlier tension still lingering. In the control booth, the director was barking orders, trying to salvage the show's flow. Cut to commercial in 10. He snapped as Jimmy tossed to a break, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. The second the red light on the camera blinked off, Jimmy leaned back, exhaling heavily. What the hell just happened? He muttered to his stage manager, who could only shrug. Backstage, the production team was in chaos. The executive producer, a seasoned woman named Carla, was already on the phone with Blake's team, trying to gauge the damage. "Look, we didn't mean to push him that far," she said, her voice calm but urgent. On the other end, Blake's manager was cool, professional. "He's not coming back out tonight," he said. "Blake's done when he's done. You know how he is." Carla nodded, even though he couldn't see her, and hung up, pinching the bridge of her nose. She turned to the assistant director. "We need to spin this fast. Get social media on it. Make it look like a playful exit, not a blow-up." As the show resumed, the audience's energy picked up, but the whispers didn't stop. People were already pulling out their phones, posting clips of Blake's walk-off. The hashtag Blake walks off trending within minutes. The internet was alive with speculation, some calling Blake a diva, others praising him for standing up to what they saw as Jimmy's overreach. The story was taking on a life of its own, and Blake, still in the green room, had no idea how big it was about to get. The green room felt smaller now, the walls closing in, as Blake sat on the couch, his phone buzzing relentlessly on the coffee table. He ignored it, letting the notifications pile up, a mix of concerned texts from friends and alerts from news outlets already spinning the story. The muffled sound of the show continued through the walls. Jimmy's voice now introducing a musical guest. The crowd's applause, a distant roar. Blake's manager, Tom, slipped into the room, closing the door quietly behind him. He was a wiry man with a calm demeanor, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "You sure you're good with this?" he asked, leaning against the wall. Blake nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm not apologizing for drawing a line, Tom," he said, his voice steady. They knew what they were doing out there. Tom sighed, pulling out his own phone to scroll through the flood of X-posts. An article is already circulating. "It's blowing up," he said, holding up a screenshot of a headline. "Blake Shelton storms off Fallon's show in shocking clash." Another read, "Did Jimmy Fallon push Blake too far?" Tom shook his head. "They're eating it up. Man, half the internet's on your side, half thinks you're dodging something. You want to put out a statement." Blake waved him off. "Let him talk. I'm not feeding the machine tonight." Outside, the show was wrapping up, Jimmy delivering his closing monologue with his usual charm, though his jokes felt a little forced, the audience's laughter a touch polite. As the credits rolled, the production team huddled in the control booth, dissecting the fallout. Carla, the executive producer, was already fielding calls from network execs. Her tone clipped as she defended the segment. "It was a standard game. Nobody expected him to bolt," she said, pacing. The exec on the line wasn't buying it. "Fix this, Carla. We can't have our biggest guest walking off like that." She hung up, turning to the social media manager. "Push the narrative that it was all in good fun. Blake's just a passionate guy. Get some clips of him laughing earlier in the show out there." Meanwhile, in the parking lot, Blake slipped out a side exit, avoiding the paparazzi already gathering at the main doors. The night air was cool, a stark contrast to the stuffy studio. He climbed into his black SUV, the driver glancing at him in the rearview mirror, but saying nothing. As they pulled away from the studio, Blake's phone lit up again, this time with a call from Gwen. He answered, his voice softening. "Hey darling," he said, leaning back in the seat. Gwen's voice was calm but firm. "You didn't tell me it got that heated. You sure you're okay?" Blake chuckled, though it lacked his usual warmth. "I'm fine. Just wasn't in the mood for Jimmy's games tonight." Gwen paused, then said, "They're already twisting it online. Some are saying you've got something to hide. Others are calling Jimmy out for crossing a line." Blake's grip tightened on the phone. "Let 'em say what they want. I'm not here to play their drama." Gwen's voice softened. I know, but this could get messy. Just be ready. Blake nodded, though she couldn't see it. I'm always ready, he said, but there was a weight in his words. Like he knew the storm was just beginning. Back at the studio, Jimmy was in his dressing room, the door closed, the energy drained from his usually buoyant demeanor. He sat in front of the mirror, rubbing his temples, replaying the moment Blake stood up. He hadn't meant to push that hard, but the game was supposed to be fun, edgy, the kind of thing that got clicks. Now, it was backfiring. His assistant knocked, poking her head in. Carla says, we need you to tweet something light, maybe a joke about Blake's exit, keep it friendly. Jimmy nodded, but his heart wasn't in it. He grabbed his phone, typing out a quick post. Guess Blake's boots were made for walking. Thanks for an unforgettable night. At Blake Shelton, he hit send, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. The internet churned. The story growing legs as fans and critics alike dissected every frame of the walk-off. Blake's SUV rolled through the city, the lights blurring past, as he stared out the window, wondering how this would play out tomorrow. The SUV glided through the city, its tires humming against the pavement as Blake stared out at the neon-lit streets. His phone, now on silent, vibrated relentlessly in his pocket, but he let it be, his mind still replaying the moment he'd walked off Jimmy's set. The weight of Gwen's warning lingered, her words about the mess this could become echoing in his head. He wasn't naive. He knew the entertainment world thrived on moments like this, turning a spark into a wildfire. But he hadn't expected it to feel so personal, like Jimmy had been fishing for a crack in his armor. Blake leaned his head back, closing his eyes, trying to shake the tension that clung to him like dust. By morning, the story had exploded. X was a battlefield of opinions, with fans rallying under hashtags like #TeamBlake and #FallonFlop. Clips of the walk-off racked up millions of views, dissected by influencers and talk show Some praised Blake for standing his ground, calling him a man of principle in an industry full of sellouts. Others speculated he was hiding something, the rejected pop deal from years ago, now a juicy mystery. Gossip sites ran wild, tossing out names of record labels and executives, each theory more outlandish than the last. Blake's team was in overdrive, fielding calls from reporters and trying to steer the narrative, but the story had a life of its own. At his hotel, Blake sat at the breakfast bar, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. Tom, his manager, was already there, scrolling through a tablet, his face grim. They're digging into that pop deal story you mentioned, Tom said, not looking up. Some blogs claiming it was a major label, saying you turned down a $10 million contract. Blake snorted, taking a sip of coffee. $10 million there, making it up as they go. It was a handshake deal, nothing on paper. Tom glanced at him, wary. You sure you don't want to clarify? People are filling in the blanks themselves. Blake shook his head. Let him. The truth's mine, not theirs. Across town, Jimmy Fallon was in a meeting with his team. The mood tense. The Tonight Show's ratings had spiked from the viral moment, but the network wasn't thrilled about the optics. Carla, the executive producer, stood at the head of the table, her arms crossed. We need to get ahead of this, she said, her voice sharp. The narrative's slipping. People are saying Jimmy ambushed Blake. Jimmy, slouched in his chair, looked exhausted. I wasn't ambushing him, he said, frustration creeping. In it was a game, same as always. Carla raised an eyebrow. Doesn't matter how it was meant, it's how it looks. We need you two to make nice. Publicly, Jimmy's team had already reached out to Blake's people, proposing a joint statement or a follow-up appearance to smooth things over. The response was polite but firm. Blake wasn't interested. Jimmy rubbed his face, feeling the weight of it. He'd built his career on being the nice guy, the host who made everyone feel at home. Now he was being painted as the villain in some corners of the internet. His phone buzzed with a text from a mutual friend in the industry. Talk to Blake. Man, he's not the type to hold a grudge. Jimmy sighed, knowing it wasn't that simple. Back at the hotel, Blake was on a video call with Gwen, her face filling the screen, her eyes searching his. You're trending everywhere, she said, her tone half amused, half concerned. They're saying you're either a hero or a hothead. Blake chuckled, the sound rough. Guess I'm used to that by now. Gwen's expression softened. Just don't let it get to you. You did what felt right. Blake nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. On the calls he'd dodged from old industry contacts. People sniffing around for dirt on that long-ago deal. As the day wore on, the pressure mounted. Blake's label was pushing for a statement to calm the speculation, while talk shows and podcasts were clamoring for his side of the story. Jimmy, meanwhile, was prepping for that night's show, his team scripting a careful monologue to address the incident without escalating it. Both men, in their own worlds, felt the story slipping out of their control, the public's hunger for drama driving it forward. The afternoon sun slanted through the hotel blinds, casting long shadows across the room where Blake sat, his coffee long gone cold. His phone, now off silent, was a constant hum of notifications, but he kept it face down, focusing instead on the muted TV in the corner. A news channel was replaying the walk-off clip, a pundit analyzing Blake's body language like it was a crime scene. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, and turned the volume off. Tom, still glued to his tablet, looked up, labels pushing harder for a statement. He said, his tone cautious. They're worried this could hurt your next album. Drop. Blake leaned back, his arms crossed. They're always worried. I didn't get this far by jumping every time the internet throws a tantrum. Across town, Jimmy Fallon's team was in full damage control mode. The Tonight Show's writers' room buzzed with nervous energy as they crafted a monologue for that night's taping. Jimmy sat at the head of the table, scribbling notes, his usual playfulness replaced by a quiet intensity. We can't ignore it, he said, tapping his pen against the script. But we're not throwing Blake under the bus either. Carla nodded, her phone already buzzing with updates from the network. Keep it light, acknowledge the moment, make it about you to being friends. People need to see, this isn't a feud. Jimmy nodded, but the knot in his stomach hadn't eased. He'd reached out to Blake personally, a short text apologizing if he'd crossed a line, but there was no reply. Online, the narrative was spiraling. Ex-posts were split, some users painting Blake as a principled artist standing up to media overreach, others accusing him of being overly sensitive, dodging questions to hide some deeper secret. A few opportunistic influencers had dug into the old pop deal story, throwing out names of executives and labels, none of them accurate but all of them gaining traction. One viral thread claimed Blake had turned down a deal with a major pop star's team, sparking wild speculation about who it could have been. The hashtag Blake's Secret was trending, and every hour brought a new wave of theories. Blake's team was fielding interview requests nonstop, from morning shows to music podcasts, all wanting the exclusive Tom read one aloud. They're offering a sit-down, primetime, your terms. You could shut this down. Blake shook his head, his jaw tight. I'm not going on TV to explain myself. I said what I said, and I walked when it got too far. That's the story. Tom sighed, knowing better than to push. Instead, he forwarded a few supportive posts from fans, hoping to lift Blake's mood. One read, Blake Shelton's real as hell, walked off when Fallon got too nosy. Respect. Blake glanced at it, his lips twitching into a faint smile, but it didn't last. Meanwhile, Gwen was on her way to New York, her flight landing that evening. She'd texted Blake to let him know, insisting they talk in person. You don't need to fight this alone, she'd said in a voice message, her tone steady but warm. Blake hadn't responded yet, but the thought of her being there grounded him, a reminder of what mattered outside the noise. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about one bad night on a talk show. The questions Jimmy asked, the way they'd dug into his past, felt like a coordinated hit, like someone had fed the show those prompts to stir up trouble. At the Tonight Show studio, the crew was prepping for the evening's taping, the air thick with anticipation. Jimmy rehearsed his monologue, a careful mix of humor and humility. Acknowledging the walk-off without assigning blame, Blake's a friend, a legend, and maybe I got a little too curious last night, he'd say, pausing for the laugh. But those boots of his, they're made for walking, and I respect the hell out of that. The writers nodded, satisfied, but Jimmy wasn't so sure. He kept checking his phone, hoping for a response from Blake, something to signal they could move past this. As the day faded into evening, both men were bracing for the next wave. Blake, in his hotel, was steeling himself for Gwen's arrival. In the inevitable conversation about what came next, Jimmy, in his dressing room, was running lines, trying to project the confidence he didn't quite feel. The internet kept churning, the story growing bigger, and neither of them could predict where it would land. The hotel suite was quiet when Gwen arrived, her presence a calm anchor in the storm that had followed Blake all day. She dropped her bag by the door, her eyes locking onto his as she crossed the room. Without a word, she sat beside him on the couch, her hand finding his, her touch steadying the restlessness he hadn't realized was still churning inside him. You look like you've been through it, she said, her voice soft but direct. Blake managed a half smile, squeezing her hand. Feels like I've been run over by a freight train of tweets. Gwen didn't laugh, just studied him, waiting for the real answer. He sighed, leaning back. I didn't think it'd blow up like this. I just wanted to shut it down, not start a war. Across town, the Tonight Show was in full swing, the audience buzzing as Jimmy delivered his monologue. The Blake bit landed well, the crowd chuckling at his boots made for walking line, their applause warm but cautious, like they were still testing the air. Backstage, Carla watched the monitors, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The ratings were up, the viral moment doing its job, but the network was still nervous, pushing for a resolution that didn't leave them looking like the bad guys. Jimmy, offstage now, checked his phone again. Still no reply from Blake. He tossed it onto his dressing room table, frustration creeping in. He'd meant to keep things fun, not spark a firestorm. In the hotel, Gwen was scrolling through X on her phone, reading posts aloud to Blake, her tone a mix of amusement and exasperation. "They're saying, you're hiding a secret album now. Some pop record you recorded and buried." Blake snorted, shaking his head. "If I had a pop album, it'd be the worst kept secret in Nashville." Gwen smirked, but her eyes were serious. "You need to say something, Blake. Not to them, not to the blogs, but to your people. Your fans are out there fighting for you, but they need to hear your voice." Blake looked at her, the weight of her words settling in. He'd been running from the noise, but maybe she was right. Maybe silence was letting the story write itself. By the next morning, Blake's team had drafted a post for X, short and to the point, at his insistence. He read it over, tweaking a word here and there, making sure it sounded like him. "Folks, I walked off because I believe in keeping some things private. No secrets, no drama, just me being me. Thanks for having my back." He hit send, and, within minutes, the post was flooded with replies. Fans cheering his honesty, others still pushing for more details. The speculation didn't stop, but it slowed, the tide turning as his words cut through the noise. Jimmy, meanwhile, was prepping for a morning meeting with the network. His team pitching ideas to keep the momentum without fueling the feud narrative. They floated inviting Blake back, maybe for a casual segment. No games, just music. Jimmy liked the idea, but wasn't hopeful. "He's not gonna come back so soon," he said, rubbing his neck. "Not after that." Carla nodded, already on her phone with Blake's manager, feeling out the possibility. The response was polite but non-committal. Blake's team focused on protecting his space, not re-entering the fray. As the week unfolded, the story began to fade, overtaken by the next big headline. A new scandal in Hollywood. Blake and Gwen flew back to Nashville, the city's familiar rhythm, a bomb after New York's chaos. He spent a day in the studio, laying down tracks, the music grounding him in a way no interview ever could. Jimmy, back in his routine, kept the show rolling. His charm intact, but his approach a little more cautious. The memory of Blake's exit a quiet lesson in boundaries. The internet moved on, but for both men, the moment lingered. A reminder of how quickly a spark could ignite and how hard it was to control the flames. Blake, strumming his guitar in the quiet of his home studio, felt the weight lift, his focus back on what mattered. The music, the life he'd built, and the line he'd drawn that he'd never cross again.